Well, last week we looked at key themes from the Democratic National Convention, and this week we are turning our attention to the Republicans. Joining us with analysis not only of what it means for our country, but also for the battleground state of North Carolina, is my good friend Rick Henderson. He is editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Rick, welcome back to the program.
Thanks very much, Donna.
So the Democrats, it was all Zoom and it was a little bit subdued, et cetera, in terms of just tone and the way that it came across, since we're used to conventions, of course, being cheering people in an auditorium. The Republicans this time around seem to manage to give it a little bit more energy and a few more people. Did you notice the difference there, first of all?
Absolutely. It was a much more energetic and normal looking convention, even though there was no balloon drop. Instead, there was a huge fireworks display afterward,
Right.
which may well, as more than one observer I've seen on social media point out, this may be the last time we ever see an indoor convention in a convention hall, since basically the purpose of having them in the convention halls for so long was to cut deals, to pass platforms, to often nominate candidates, the people who are going to be heading the ticket. And so much of that was done in advance. And then in this case, the Republicans didn't even have a platform. So the use of having everyone in the same building at the same time goes away quite a bit. And in fact, the sort of the business part of the convention could be accomplished as it was in Charlotte in a day with a few hundred people. So I think this is probably the start. I think some hybrid of what we saw the past 2 weeks is what we're going to see from now on with conventions. You will see some staged, filmed pieces that are used in between the live speakers. The live speakers may be at multiple locations, and you may see, it's not the first time there's been an outdoor acceptance speech. JFK did that in 1960 at the LA Coliseum. Barack Obama did that 2008 in Denver at Mile High. And then President Trump did it this time around at the White House.
Let's talk a little bit about the key themes and messages from the Republicans. They had a whole lot of speakers. They had people that I would call just average Americans, as well as some well-known elected officials. After listening and watching for 4 days, what do you think their 2 or 3 primary messages were?
Well, the thing that was I guess not shocking, but still a little bit unusual, is that President Trump is still running as the outsider, even though he's the incumbent. He's still running against Washington. He's still running against the swamp. And with Joe Biden as his opponent, that is more realistic than if almost any other Democrat had been elected or chosen to head the ticket, because Joe Biden has been in Washington nonstop for almost half a century. And so you could very easily run against Joe Biden, either the Senate that he was a leader of for many years, or when he was vice president for 8 years. And so Donald Trump is still running against the insiders in Washington and running as an outside candidate. So I think that was one theme. The second theme, of course, was the law and order theme, which we anticipated as much. Unfortunately, the violence, the looting, the rioting taking place in Kenosha, Wisconsin is very disturbing. And that was a backdrop for a lot of the talk, especially Wednesday and Thursday nights, when Vice President Pence gave his acceptance speech. And then when the president gave his, and when the people introducing the president gave their talks, was that essentially we may be in charge of Washington, but there are Democrats in charge of many cities, and they are not able to keep the cities under control. They are allowing businesses and homes to be randomly and wantonly looted, and we have to step up our presence to prevent basically our major economic centers from going into the hands of anarchists. And that came through very clearly on Wednesday and Thursday. And before that, then it was more of an introduction of what a second Trump administration would mean for issues such as let's say people of lower incomes, minorities, in issues such as school choice, prison reform, and also some of the future of the party when you had former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and current South Carolina Senator Tim Scott being the headliners on the first night.
Rick, it seemed to me that it's kind of boiled down between a week of the Democrats and then a week of the Republicans, to the Democrats messaging out that, hey, Donald Trump is a bad guy, he doesn't know how to be president, and he's messed up the U.S. response to COVID-19. versus Donald Trump essentially saying, hey, I'm the law and order president. I'm going to keep you safe, whether it's here on our own. On our own land here in this country, or if it means across the world fighting terrorists. Is it really boiling down to that type of an election?
It is, and it's basically boiling down to that in the suburbs of the swing states, because I think what some of the analysis you see coming out so far is that it looks as if the Democratic and Republican conventions helped Joe Biden in blue states, and the two conventions helped Republican Donald Trump in red states. And so the question now is, how does this affect swing voters? And there are people who have run focus groups of Republicans, let's say marginally attached Republicans, who are very much shaken by the violence in Minneapolis earlier, in Wisconsin more recently. And unless the Democrats come up with some sort of effective response to that, Vice President Biden has spoken numerous times over the past week saying that violence, rioting, looting are not acceptable. But until that message resonates, then that's a leg up for the president, in that you do have these cities largely controlled by Democratic mayors, because there aren't many cities left under Republican control. But you do have the situations in which the cities are basically allowed to burn, and the Democratic mayors don't seem to be very effective in dealing with this at all.
Rick, you mentioned an outreach to the suburbs, et cetera, and certainly we saw that during the week for the Republicans. We saw a lot of women who were giving presentations talking about how Donald Trump has employed lots of women and relies on them, et cetera. So we know he has an issue with women and suburban women specifically, but there seemed to be an incredible outreach and to minorities, particularly African Americans, a lot of Latinos. We saw several people who are Cuban Americans talking about having come from communism and socialism, et cetera. Can you ever remember a Republican convention where there were so many people of color?
It's hard to remember one in particular. And part of that is, this time around, the convention very much focused around the president and around the people inside the White House. And so it was much easier to have the surrogates, the people who held other speaking slots, fill different roles, because quite often conventions, like the Democratic convention last week, and like most conventions, you roll out the people who we all know. You have a couple of rising stars, if you will, sprinkled here and there. But basically, the people who are involved in these conventions and who come before the American people are familiar faces, or folks you've known before. And so you saw with the Democrats, all the former living presidents. You saw all the people who ran against Joe Biden and lost being featured at different times. You saw people who were familiar, and that's normally how conventions are handled. With the Republicans, you had the vice president and the president, their families, and then the handful of elected officials, such as Ambassador Haley and Senator Scott. But other than that, there's an awful lot of everyday Americans of all colors and genders involved.